welcome back to the latest episode of Mrs. Mummypenny Talks. The big questions. So season 6 is all about the amazing big questions, and I have now got one of my favourite people in the world. I mean, that's quite extreme to say that, but you are certainly my favourite person in the personal finance world, and we've got a lot of shared connections, Mr. Pete Matthew. But we've recorded so many podcasts together and YouTube videos, and I love coming on your show, and you've been on my show loads of times, so I had to get you back for season 6. So thanks for joining me.
No worries. Thanks for having me, mate. Always good to see you, and good to chew the fat together.
Always good. Now, we are both from I'm from Penzance in Cornwall, and Pete lives in Penzance in Cornwall. So that's our shared connection. And Pete actually lives about 500 meters away from my sister's house, which is so weird.
It's bizarre. It's the weirdest thing, wasn't it, when I was walking the dog and bumped into you?
Like,
Island. It's a really odd rainy morning, wasn't it?
I went home to Cornwall to see my sister for my birthday weekend, and I don't know. I think I was going on a mammoth walk. I was walking from Haymore to Newlyn to Mousehole, back to Newlyn to Penzance, then back to Haymore, which is probably like, I don't know, 12, 13 mile walk.
I'm going to say, it's at least 10, so probably 12 miles, I would have thought, decent walk.
Yeah, and I saw you en route, and it was just so fortuitous. It was really cool, and we literally exchanged lives in 10 minutes. And we talked really fast, and Pete's a very good friend. So yes, thank you ever so much for coming onto the podcast. So we're going to be talking about, that was such a long intro. We're going to be talking about the big questions, and I did think, should I ask Pete a financial question, because obviously you're a financial planner and you talk about money for a living, but then I threw some other questions at you and that took your fancy. So we are talking about, does life get easier as we age? Which I'm so excited about.
It's such a big question, isn't it?
I know. It's literally this podcast season is just going to run and run and run, because there's so many big questions we can answer, and I know so many wise people who have got incredible views on these questions. It's just going to go on forever, and I absolutely adore it. So yeah.
It's good. It's nice to answer different questions, actually, isn't it? And I'm sure finance will come into it, given both of our backgrounds. But it's good to chew the fat on something a bit more existential.
Oh, that's a good word. That's such a good word. Okay, so tell the watchers and listeners who you are and how you've come to this point of life.
Cool. So I'm Pete, married to Jo for 27 years, 2 grown-up girls, 24 and 21. Live in Penzance, as Lynn says, but I'm a Yorkshire native, but met my lovely Cornish maid at university, and my fate was sealed, so I knew within a week of meeting her that I'd marry her and that I'd end up in Cornwall. But Massey, my mum is Cornish. Do you know that about me, Lynn?
No.
Yeah, my mum was raised in Hale, so I kind of claim pretty thin Cornish blood, but born and raised in Yorkshire. I am a 26-year veteran financial planner, so I own and run a practice called Jackson's, which has been in Penzance for 100 years. I was fortunate to sort of buy into it. Yeah, but I bought into it 18 years ago, so I've done 20 years here in total, and 18 of those as a director shareholder. We are 21 people, so 8 advisors and 13 support, and privileged to serve many local families for multiple generations and multiple decades. So, and then the other thing that I guess you kind of need to know is that in 2010 I started messing around with a video camera and started making YouTube videos, and I thought, well, what do I want to talk about? And I thought I'd talk about what I know, which is personal finance, and that project was called Meaningful Money, and it's become a bit of a monster, turned into a podcast, which was really the thing that worked best for me. But now, YouTube channel, 116,000 subscribers, podcast is approaching 8 million total downloads, and it kind of changed my life.
That is just, you gloss over those numbers, Pete. That is such an achievement.
It's a lot of people. Yeah, thank you. It is. And I'm having a blast doing it still. I'm nearly 15 years in. Next April
Yeah.
will be 15 years. So, and I'm still having an absolute riot doing it. And it's changed my life in many ways. And it's changed Jackson's because 85% of
Yeah.
the business now comes from meaningful money. So Jackson's is the practice.
Wow.
And so, yeah, it completely changed my life in ways that I never expected to do. I was literally doing it as a hobby to start with. And it's just become a monster that I sometimes wonder if I'm actually in control of. But there we go.
Um, yeah, I guess there's an element of we wing things, and
Oh, everybody does.
there's
Nobody knows
always
what they're doing.
I've always got a rough plan. Like I sort of know what I'm doing for the rest of this year, but the thing is curveballs come in and change what you're
Always.
doing. So, but I love that. Like we literally, I mean, I suppose you've got two hats, haven't you? Your financial planning hat and then your meaningful money hat. But
Uh-huh.
I love what we do. Like
Yeah, me
it's the
too.
best job in the world because literally we're helping. And I know a lot of what you do with Jackson's as well as meaningful money is all about sort of holistic
Oh, yeah.
happiness as well. Like, yeah, of course we talk about personal finance, but you also have to talk about mental health and you also have to talk about physical health. And
Yeah.
we'll touch on a lot of that because it is very relevant to the subject of aging.
Uh-huh.
But also, you've got a book out, which is the Meaningful Money
Handbook. Yep.
Handbook,
Yep.
which came out, God, like
Sep-
2019?
September 2018. Yeah, amazingly.
2018.
Yeah.
And you're doing a follow up, aren't you?
Yeah, the next one's out. It'll be next spring, 2025. So basically, the first
Yeah.
book was everything you need to know and do about personal finance up until retirement. So the logical one was to kind of close the circle, really. And the next one is about the sort of run up and the transition into retirement and then all the later life stuff we have to do as well. So, yeah, I've been thinking a lot about getting older and, the financial implications of that, but also the physical and emotional, spiritual elements of it as well. Funny, just as you get older, you think about stuff more, don't you? So, quite
Well,
pertinent.
yeah. Yeah. So right. The big question is, what does life get easier as we age? So, firstly, I'd like us to define what aging is, number one, and then can we define what getting easier means? Because there's different definitions to
Of
both of
course.
them.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, it's simplest form. Getting older simply just means passing more birthdays, doesn't it? And when people ask how old we are, we get more and more offended by it, perhaps. But just the sort of it's just a number. But of course, that's not the case because every year that goes by, we're a year more experienced, have perhaps a wider understanding of the world and how it works, while at the same time, hopefully anyway, we also have an increasing understanding of how little we know. Um,
Yeah.
Certainly that's the
Yeah.
case for me. You think you have some things kind of sorted out in your mind, and then you realize actually it's a huge world and a very complicated world, and there's actually much more that we don't know than what we
Yeah.
do. So aging is a number, but the whole other stuff comes with it. I think in terms of life getting easier, that's very subjective. But
Yeah.
there's also it's our perception of whether life is easier or not.
Yes.
So when I've got two young adult children, 24 and 21, right, both girls, and I perceive that in many ways life is harder for them than it is for me now. Obviously, they
Yeah.
don't have the financial means that I do, because if they did, they wouldn't be asking me to help them out so much. But that's what you do, isn't it? I think there is more pressure on them, more social pressure on them than there is for me now, or there was for me when I was their age. So I
Yeah.
think the world is changing in that regard.
Yeah.
I also think there's more opportunities for them now
Yeah.
than there was for us, putting us in roughly the same bracket there,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
When we were in our early 20s. So I think for me now, I feel life is a lot easier. My girls will say something like, when I spent the morning cleaning out the gutters on my house, they'll say, God, is that what adulting is like? You get up on a Saturday and you do like a really mundane, um, job around the house, whereas they're off, having brunch and doing all the things that you can
Yeah.
do when you've got absolutely no responsibilities. Um, and I say, yeah, that is what adulting is like, but actually it's great. And I am happier now, I think, than I've ever been. Um,
Right. Yeah.
which is so for me, certainly life is easier. I have more means now. I totally understand that's not the case for everybody. I'm 49, by the way. I know I look about 10 years older, but I'm still the right side of 50 for about another 6 months. So I think life is easier for me. I have greater means. I am more widely read than I've ever been, because I've read more books at this point
Yeah.
than I had at any previous. And that gives me, I think, a worldview which is more chill, actually,
Yeah.
more tolerant,
Yeah.
less dogmatic,
Yeah.
more open. And I think that a lot of these things give me the perception that life is easier. Um,
Yeah.
Easier also is a relative term. That's not to say it's easy, but perhaps easier than it was. Your question is, does life get easier as we age? The answer has got to be yes and no. I think it is in a lot of ways, and in
Mm.
other ways it's harder. I know it's a lot harder for me to like get up after squatting down to put the lead on the dog. So in that way, it's not so easy as it used to be, right? So I think in many ways it's easier, in a lot of ways it's not as well.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a really valid point because I put the question out to my Instagram community, and one of my friends, Kate, who I'm going on holiday with in like 4 days, she came back and said that she challenged back, like, what does easier actually mean? Because when you're older, you most and a lot of these comments we're saying are sort of generalized, but when you're older
Of
you
course.
have a bit more control over the pace of your life. As you say, you understand a lot more about life, so yes, it becomes easier, but then you have this added layer of particularly, so I'm 47, a couple of years younger than you, and my kids are 16, 14 and 11, so considerably younger than yours. And when you look at the complexity of life for me in my 40s as a single mum of three,
Mhm.
testosterone filled boys, um, it's probably my most complicated, challenging decade. But what goes with that is, I mean, control. Okay, the only thing you can ever control is your control is a really difficult concept, actually, because the only actual thing you can control is the water you drink, or the food you consume, or the exercise you choose to do. You can't control your thoughts.
No,
Well,
to a point
with
maybe,
a
but no, that's
yeah,
a lot
you can.
harder than controlling your physical self,
It's really hard,
I
and you
think.
certainly cannot control any other people,
No, and you
because you
want
can
to.
barely control yourself. So I'm not sure that when my friend said that it comes with more control, I'm not sure that that's relative. I'm not sure that's really true, but that's just
I
my
think,
view.
I mean, it's a sort of, it's like the Stoic message, isn't it? So I've read a lot of Stoic stuff in the last few years as well, which has definitely shaped my kind of worldview.
Yeah.
And
What does
essentially,
can you just explain what stoic actually means?
yeah, so Stoic is a school of philosophy. Ancient Greek philosophy is really where it started. Uh, Various sort of proponents of it. Perhaps the most famous is Marcus Aurelius, who was
Yeah.
emperor, Roman emperor, but who was unbelievably self-aware for somebody in basically the most powerful position in the world, and very humble, self-effacing, aware of his own failures or tendencies towards failings. And so
Right.
self-awareness, I think, is a superpower, and that's something that, generally speaking, as a species, we're not very good at. But if you want to kind of distill the Stoic philosophy, it's basically there's a whole ton of stuff you can't control. Most things, 99.9% of things that happen to you, that go on in the world, you can't control. But the one thing you
Yeah.
can control is your response to them. It's not easy, mind. So
Yeah.
it's not to say that, it's a walk in the park to do that, but For instance, if, I mean, God forbid, I am diagnosed with something hideous tomorrow, my response can be, right, that's it, I'm done, I'm giving up. And, woe is me, the world has dealt me a rough hand and all that sort of stuff. Or I can say, well, I have no guaranteed right to a healthy future. The universe is full of random crap. And turns out this is the hand I've been dealt. And so I have to deal with it. That's not to say that, I sort of swan through life with a hideous cancer diagnosis or whatever and just putting on a brave face, but it's how I choose to respond to anything. And that, I mean, it's up in like Barnsley the last couple of days. This family's essentially been wiped out, mum and dad and two daughters, and there's another daughter who wasn't killed. I mean, that's just unthinkable tragedy that the universe has dealt to this 11-year-old girl who's left now without mum and dad and without her two sisters. Now, she has no way of kind of computing that at 11 years old. But, for everything like that, there's somebody else who gets, who's born into a billionaire family and never wants for anything and lives to 90 with really good health. So the universe is random, and a lot of the time it's a bit crap. But the Stoic thing is how we will respond to it. And I think my kind of definition of trying to build the best self as I get older is being careful about how I respond to stuff, being really careful about how I judge others, and really trying not to judge others, as difficult as that is at times. And so, control I think is important, but really the only thing we can control is ourselves. But it's really bloody difficult to do that.
Yeah. Gosh, that's quite a lot to think about.
Where do you want to go from that, Lynn?
Discussion. Oh my God. Right, the thought that came to me, because my youngest is 11 and he finishes primary school today. So after I speak to you, I'm going to go down to the school where they have this massive water fight and there's an ice cream van with free ice cream. It's a tradition. And I was, and it was this prom yesterday. So I was again down at the school and I was talking to one of my favorite teachers who's the school counselor basically. And I was telling her about my children because there's been, I'll tell you about it offline, but there's been a really big change with my children where I've got all three of my boys back with me all the time now. And it's quite, you know what's been happening the last 5 years. So to get that back is fucking huge. Massive.
Yeah.
And I was talking to this teacher about what happened and she was so happy. And I was talking about my my anger related to the situation because I'm just really angry about what's happened the last 5 years. And she was like, well, this is what I say to the kids. So we've got words that we can say out loud, and then we've got words that we keep inside, and we call them. She had a phrase for it, and that's the language they use with primary school kids. And I was like, bloody hell, that's so right. She's like, those angry words, you just can't let them out when you're in a meeting with your ex or whatever. So
you mentioned
it's the same kind of thing, isn't it?
It
Your
is.
Reaction
It is. And you said, you live in a house with 3 testosterone-fueled boys. And I mean, that's absolutely right. I mean, I live in a house filled with estrogen, right? Even my 2 dogs are girls. So, I think one of the things about getting older is it's definitely easier, I think, to self-regulate.
Yeah.
The hormones eventually settle down, don't they? So when we're in our teens and perhaps early 20s, the chemical mix washing around our veins is potent, to say the least, and is inevitably going to impact the way we respond to things. I see that in my girls now. Very quick to respond, very visceral in the way that they might respond to something that offends them or brings them joy or whatever. The response is usually very quick and very unguarded. And that's fine for the most part. We live in a civilized society, so sometimes we have to kind of guard our responses. But I think that gets easier. And I speak as somebody with a hormone deficiency, right, which is medicated. But it's unbelievable how much the chemicals in our body affect our responses to things. I mean, this is
Oh
now known,
my
right? But
God,
we're
yeah.
essentially an unbelievably finely balanced chemical concoction. And if anything goes off, well, that's where depression and anxiety and so many
Yeah.
things come off. And I think part of getting older is understanding that more. And rather
Yeah.
than saying, well, that person just needs to snap out of it because they're behaving badly,
Uh-uh.
it's like maybe there's a whole lot of shit going on. And maybe that there is, they need some medicinal help or some counseling or whatever. And just actually caring and thinking, well, look, life is hard. And so
Yeah.
maybe we just need to sort of support each other and in however ways we do. So I think the ability to self-regulate gets
Mm.
easier. It's never easy though.
No, and as we age as well, we build a bigger toolkit, don't we, of
Yeah,
healthy coping mechanisms. So I talk a lot about I talk about unhealthy and healthy coping mechanisms because I've got both. Um, like but as I think I saw you in March, and
wow.
after March, I had a massive issue with my hormones and where my estrogen just massively crashed. And then I got, as you allude to, like insomnia, and then that leads to anxiety and depression and paranoia and
Mm-hmm.
anger and all kinds of stuff. So it's been a journey from like May when I was really rock bottom. June I did a lot of self-care and tried to recover, and the estrogen, I started to pump estrogen into my body from May, and now I feel like literally feel balanced, apart from the anger. But you know what, anger's an emotion,
Mm-hmm.
like love, like happiness,
Yeah.
like sadness, so it's fine to feel it. It's just the responses. But so I'm in therapy at the moment, and I've always been in therapy my entire life. Like, I ain't scared to say that.
No, no.
Um, and yeah, my therapist now, who's a lady I've had for like 4 years, and I dip in and out of it. I saw her yesterday, and she every time I talk to her, she gives me like a couple new tools. So one of the recent ones she taught me was, and I've been taught it before, but it's like 7-11 breathing. So when you're feeling that anger and the anxiety that goes with that anger and the uncontrolled, the fight, flight, fawn, freeze response, which is your sort of frontal cortex of your brain kicking into action and just goes fight or
Mm.
run
Yeah.
away or
Mm.
freeze. It's like caveman days. Then so yeah, you do count to seven in, and then count to 11 out, and you repeat that 3 times. And she's like, by the end of that cycle, your anger and your anxiety will be dispelled. And it's so simple, but it's
Yeah.
really effective.
But even that's probably, regulating oxygen and sort of carbon dioxide, nitrogen levels, all that sort of stuff. It's bound to have a chemical, just regulating our
Yes.
breathing. So, I think our ability to, yeah, as you say, we have more tools and stuff to kind of avoid the extremes. I mean, subject
Yeah.
to the chemicals being right, because I take 2 injections every morning as well for my own sort of chemical imbalances, and like you use the word balance, and you feel it's like things are now as they should be.
Yeah.
So notwithstanding any medical reasons why things might be off the scale, yeah, you're right. We definitely build up tools to help cope, and
Mm.
kind of frameworks, I think, as well, to how we see the world and see other
Yeah.
people and how we deal with them. I mean, I was raised in evangelical Christian circles, and so that was the framework by which I kind of viewed the world for a lot of years. Now, much more rounded, I'd like to think. I kind of hold that stuff fairly lightly these days and take the best stuff from it and ignore an awful lot of the
Yeah.
bigoted, judgmental crap. Um, and, I've, in my own way, been quite sort of angry about how that impacted decisions I made. We didn't
Yeah.
move to Cornwall for 5 years because, the pastor of the church didn't think it was a good idea, as if he had any right to dictate what I did with my life. But back then, that was a big deal for me, right? So, I've had to kind of deal with that. And so has
Wow.
Joe. Um, and so your frameworks change as well, the tools you have to cope in the moment, but also your frameworks, the way you think about things. And I think actually that's one of the highest callings we can do, is to kind of proactively develop our thought processes. I really wish we taught this to kids in school,
Oh God, yeah.
sort of frameworks for thinking, rather than telling them what to think and giving them, just this is how you should think, this is how you should do A, B, and C. Actually giving them frameworks for thinking. Absolutely brilliant book, by the way. 2 great books on this. One is Clear Thinking by Shane Parrish. Shane is the mind behind Farnham Street, which is fs.blog, which is my favorite site on the internet, just for people who want to think clearly. And the book is called Clear Thinking. It's absolutely brilliant. And the other one is called Loser Think by Scott Adams, who created the Dilbert comics.
Oh, yeah.
But he's a political commentator in the US as well, but also the whole concept of thinking like a loser and trying to avoid that, and so those are just brilliant books for thinking intelligently, thinking like a proper human, and elevating ourselves above kind of visceral fight or flight responses. You can never completely overcome that. There's no doubt about that. We are animals ultimately, but we are elevated, higher animals. And I think pursuing sharper thinking, as well as control of our emotions and framework for this stuff, is a really high calling. It's like, I consider it one of the most important things that I do, trying to expand my worldview. And to do so proactively and intentionally.
Yeah, that's amazing. Right, so can we talk about life stages? Because you sort of touched on it with your daughters as well, but I think we'll take it back to my kids as well.
Okay.
So if we sort of go through it decade by decade, and obviously there's more decades, there's some decades we're going to focus a little bit more on, which is probably like 40s, but also I want to touch on we're still in our 40s. We are, but also the difference between men and women, because I think you will be able to give, because I'm a feminist and I'm going to be very passionate about sticking up for gender equality, but it'll be interesting to get your point of view as well as a balancer. Knowing what I know about what my boys go through at school, I would say it's fucking hard to be a teenager at the moment. And so I grew up where you live, and things are different in Cornwall. They really are. It's a more chilled out place. It's beautiful. Like, okay, there's no money down there. It's the most, it's the poorest county in England, isn't it?
Probably it's certainly, yeah. I mean, Penwith, where you were born, which is basically the far west of the county. I think the last time I saw it was the 4th poorest district in the country.
Yeah,
which you wouldn't really think, but it is. Part of that's the disparity between earnings and house prices, and sort of seasonality of earnings and stuff like that.
Yeah, very much so. But I was privileged when I grew up, because my dad was in the army and then the MOD, so he earned a good salary because he was in public service his entire life, and worked at Cold Rose, the RAF base, until he was 60. But I think teenage life for me was quite easy, and then of course my mum died when I was 16, and then it all completely went to shit. But I didn't have social media, and it almost like it's the same as people in their 20s as well. Like the pressures, oh my god, the pressures of social media, and
it's insane. Yeah.
Oh my god! Just imagine like the parties we used to go to as like teenagers, and if that got onto social media, which it does now.
Well, it does now. And part of the problem is that you can never get away from it. So, I mean, when you and I were at school or at college, you left all your mates at like 3:15, and you didn't see them again until 9 o'clock the following morning, and you basically had some peace and quiet in the afternoon, evening. Obviously depending on what your home life was like, but home, if it's a refuge, that's what we always tried to provide for our girls. But very difficult when while you're walking home from school, there's this barrage of messages, and you can never really get away from it. It's very well documented, obviously, the impact of sort of being always on. There's a great book called Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport, and he tells a story in there about, in American universities, they have counselors, they call them. So basically, the people responsible for looking after the mental health of the students.
Yeah.
And there was like this real angst going on because, there was always kind of a baseline level of anxiety, depression, eating disorders, suicidal thoughts and stuff. Always kind of, because we're just humans, right? So, and then suddenly it didn't just sort of gradually rise. Literally from one year to the next, there was this huge increase and it stayed that high, right? And there was, they were having symposiums and like trying to sort of decide, why is this the case? Why has it, of all these symptoms, suddenly gone through the roof? Vastly more anxiety, hugely more eating disorders. And somebody posited that actually the kids that were then at university, these were the kids who were like 13 when the iPhone was announced. And, that was 2007. And of course, a couple of years after that, these teenagers are now having iPhones. They're on Facebook. They're on, obviously, by then, Snapchat and all the others. And it's a direct correlation between the all-consuming prevalence of these devices and the apps, the social media platforms, and this rapid decline in mental health. And the other thing that's in that book actually is that there is a portion of the brain called the default network, which basically lights up when we're doing nothing else. And they put it down to the fact that we kind of have to compute our place in the world. So when we spend all day interacting, and if we take this back to sort of prehistoric terms, we spend our days interacting with folks in the cave, and we go out and we do our hunting or whatever, and we have a fight with somebody and an argument with our spouse or whatever, and then things quieten down and our subconscious brain kind of processes that. But there's been studies done about if you don't allow that default network to light up, in other words, if you are always continually stimulated, then your ability to process the world is just massively compromised. And so this whole piece in this book says that it kind of culminates with this line. It says, we are not wired to be permanently wired. In other words, we must carve out time to essentially do nothing, to have no inputs, to just allow the default network of our brain to process what is an increasingly complicated world. And our kids just don't know how to do that. And they don't get time. I mean, if they're on their phones in bed, literally the second they wake up in the morning till the second they go to sleep, it's properly unhealthy for our psychology. So, we got to do something about it. I don't actually blame the device, and I do blame a little bit the social media platforms, because they are essentially designed to keep us watching. Yeah. But I think we need to teach our kids how to use them, but not in a kind of judgy way. It's hard though, and I think it's harder. I'm kind of 8 to 10 years past this, with the girls at 24 and 21. But yeah, I mean, you said you're a feminist, Lynn. I am too. I'm a father to 2 girls, and I see the headwinds that they face compared to their sort of male confederates. But I think it's getting better, but we got a long way to go, and I think there's a lot of pressure on women. Jesus.
It's really interesting that you are a dad of girls and I'm a mum of boys, so we can literally see the whole picture. And what I see, because my boys share everything with me, we've got a really open, honest relationship. We talk about emotions, we talk about sex, we talk about all of it. And what they are bombarded with on social media is just atrocious.
Awful.
Like the reform Farage stuff they saw on TikTok before the election was disgusting. The Andrew Tate stuff that they are constantly bombarded with, the Ed Matthews stuff, is absolutely shocking. And thank God that I'm bringing up my 3 boys to appreciate that it's a load of misogynistic bullshit. But we're in the minority understanding technology and understanding our children's technology. Most parents, they don't give a shit.
No, no.
it's not that they don't give a shit. No, there is a huge proportion of people that really don't care, and they let their kids do whatever. And yeah, we have to, like, the boys. So the boys all go to the same school from September, and they've got this like phone vault device thing that attaches to your phone, so you can't actually, it blocks your phone for the whole day. So
Nice.
the kids' phones will be blocked from 8:30 until 3:30, which I think is a brilliant idea.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I mean, we had a period where, we all put our phones down at 8 o'clock in the evening, including me and Joe, and just like, no, and we'd play a game or do something together or just read, or, we might be in separate rooms, but we
Yeah,
weren't on our phones. And the
that's
girls
really
now
good.
kind of think back to that quite fondly because it
Yeah,
kind of forced them. I just said to them, look, blame your horrible dad. If your
yeah,
mates say, why aren't you responding at 8 o'clock? Say, my dad's a twat and he won't let me have my phone. I don't care. I don't care what your friends think of me. So,
yeah,
which we'll probably get onto, giving less of a shit about things as you get older. But, but I'm saying, I'm giving you the space. I'm giving you the sort of downtime, and just the space just to be and take a breather before you face the world
yeah,
tomorrow. It's important. I think we need to
yeah,
do that. I'm worried that there's a whole generation who will kind of have to learn this stuff themselves, and either they will or they won't. They'll either become Andrew Tate or they'll realize just what a toxic influence that is. Um, and then hopefully the generation coming, like our kids
yeah,
will hopefully be, because they are raised by digital natives, hopefully they'll be better
yeah,
equipped. But I worry about
yeah,
our kids' generation,
yeah, yeah. No,
about the damage that's
I
being done.
do
Yeah.
indeed. Yeah, and when you look at the level of mental health illness in secondary schools at the
Mm.
moment, as a result of lockdown
Yeah.
and the digital impact as well, it's I don't know the exact stat, and I only know it for my local schools, but we're talking about 50% of kids have got mental health issues, and we're talking about eating disorders, OCD, anxiety,
Yeah.
agoraphobia, depression. You know, this is not little stuff. This
No.
is big, big stuff that we, as people in our 40s, we do have it easier because we are intelligent and we understand what those mental health illnesses are. And
Yeah.
we know that you need to go see a therapist if you can
Yeah.
afford it, another
Mm.
privileged thing, or you sit on a waiting list for a year, or you take some medication or whatever.
Yeah.
But you don't know that kind of stuff when you're a teenager. It's
No, it's all
just like,
consuming. Yeah.
yeah, and to be honest, you don't really know it in your 20s either. I mean, I suppose I've got a lot of friends in their 20s, and I've interviewed a few for earlier episodes of the podcast. So I interviewed like Kia Commodore, and Ola. I can't say her surname; that's so embarrassing. But it's very long, and she's Ola is all things money, and
Uh-huh.
they are like 25, 26 women, and they're black women, so
Yeah.
that adds another dimension because
Of course.
they've got the racial tension and
Hmm.
racism issues in the country to deal with. So but it's just such pressure on, and but similarly I felt immense pressure when I was in my mid to late 20s to get married and have kids. These
Yeah.
girls still feel that pressure
Wow.
because, but the pressure comes from other places. So the pressure from me to be like that was just societal pressure.
Sure.
I guess it's the same for them. It's just it comes from social media.
Yeah. I mean, I quite often say to my girls that, like, it's quite interesting is that, boyfriends now come on the scene, right? And, they might sort of like, he hasn't done this or he hasn't done that. And I just say, like, look, boys, I wasn't consider myself an adult until I was 30 at least, right? So I'm
Yeah,
kind of somewhat sympathetic to these lads who are trying to navigate their way through relationships and stuff. It's like I was an idiot for the first 5 years of my marriage, so just kind of go with it,
yeah,
and just understand that boys and everybody's kind of a work in progress, but it really takes until your 30s, I think, before you've got enough miles under the tires really to.
yeah,
Which I hope people don't feel patronised by that. But being a long way the other side of that, I can look back and see that that was the case for me. I thought
yeah,
I was smart in my 20s, and in some ways I was. Uh, but experience is important.
Yeah.
Um, it's so easy when you're younger, and I did it myself, right, to kind of despise the older generation. Say, yeah, they don't really know what they're talking about. They, their experience of the world, it doesn't really apply now. I think to an extent that's true, but human beings, human nature doesn't really change. I think that's kind of hardwired. So despite the external pressures changing, I think we are the same creatures underneath, and
Yeah.
we're just continually having to evolve how we react to a messed up world, really, in a changing world. So I think it really takes until your 30s until there's enough of a kind of context.
Yeah.
By then you've met some people, and
But then, like, I mean, the same for you and as me. Like, my 30s were a blur because I was pregnant, or I was breastfeeding, or I had like little
young kids, yeah,
kids.
yeah,
Like for my entire decade, and I could not function because I was working full time as well as bringing up these three babies. I do not know how on earth
no, I
I
don't,
did
no,
it.
no,
And this is where I'll get on to the sort of debate between men and women. It's still the case, and this is not going to change, that women do the lion's share of the caring
no doubt.
responsibilities, be that for, I mean, obviously, we've got to carry the babies, which is very difficult being pregnant, can I just say? Some people love it. I don't understand those people. And then you've got the sleepless nights and these babies attached to your boobs if you breastfeed, or constant washing of bottles if you bottle
Uh,
feed. And it's just, and like if you are breastfeeding, that the dad can't do that. I
no,
mean, they can change nappies, but you haven't got a baby attached to your boob for an hour at a time.
no, it's true.
um and it's just constant. So I pretty much spent my 30s as a zombie.
Yeah, I'd say that's fairly normal. I mean, obviously, I can't possibly speak to the experience of being a mum, and we were very fortunate in that we made a conscious decision that Joe didn't work throughout. There was a couple of reasons for that.
Yeah.
First, it was an intentional decision. Secondly, I mean, she was a nurse and a very, very capable nurse in pediatric intensive care, but she also
Wow.
suffered her own mental health issues. So she really struggled with anxiety for a long time
Yeah.
and essentially got to the point where she couldn't work. And in
Yeah.
the end, we just said, look, fortunately, I was earning enough. I mean, it was hard, mind. We didn't have holiday for most of our 30s
Yeah.
because we just couldn't afford to do it and raise two kids, and with a huge mortgage when we moved to Cornwall. So,
Yeah.
but we were fortunate. We could have had all those things had Joe been able to work, or had we decided that she wanted to work. But yeah, I mean the 30s are hard. If you've got kids, man, the 30s are hard. Of course, more and more people are putting that back to their late
Yeah.
30s, and so the sort of when your kids are 5 to 15, you're well in your 40s, if not into your 50s. So that's changing as well, which I think is an interesting
Yeah.
dynamic. I was a child bride,
Yeah.
mine, but I'd have my kids by 28. So
Well, yeah, my best friend Becky from Penzance as well. She's my age, 47, and she's got like a 7 and a 5 year old. So she's 10 years behind me in
yeah,
effect, and so her 40s are the equivalent of my 30s, and it
yeah.
is really hard.
It must
Just
be hard.
yeah,
You got a lot less energy in your 40s.
exactly. But what I will get on to is in our 40s. Um, you do start to give less of a fuck. You really do.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? And I kind of wonder why, but that's definitely true for me. You just stop caring what people think. I
No,
think
I literally do not care what people think.
it's incredibly liberating, though, isn't it?
Oh my god, it's amazing. And the point when you get to there's a lot of men and women will be nodding their heads with this, but the point when you get to where you're like you can always look at your body and think, well, it is what it is. So it's got me to this point in life, so I'm gonna love it. That is mind blowing
Yeah, it
when you can
is.
finally accept your body.
Yeah, yeah, definitely is. I think
Um
it's liberating. Like just I'd like to know why that is. Whether it's just you kind of really, like you say, you're 40 odd years in, you're pretty secure in who you are, hopefully. Um,
yeah.
and obviously there's generalizations. A lot of people are not secure in who they are, but I think certainly for me, it's like, okay. But again, I was kind of proactive about joining the dots in reverse. You think, yeah, okay, even though I have this quite sort of strongly religious background, in many ways, I tried to take the good stuff from that. And in many ways, that's made me who I am. And so I shouldn't kind of
Yeah.
despise that. I should be grateful for it. And once you're secure in who you are, then actually think what anybody else thinks doesn't matter. But then also, I think you come to the realization that actually I spend very little time thinking about other people. So probably that's the case, that people are not really thinking about me at all. They actually don't care. They're too concerned about themselves. And you think, well, actually, okay, so why have I spent like the last 25 years worrying about what people think about me when actually they're not thinking about me at all? It's weird, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. And then, but then medical stuff starts to kick in, and that does make things harder as we get older. So, we've both got
Yeah.
hormonal issues, which mess everything up.
Yeah.
And the care systems, the NHS, is not set up to support people. It doesn't have enough knowledge. All of my knowledge about perimenopause is stuff I've learned and
Self-taught.
people
Yeah.
spoken to. Yeah, probably the
Yeah.
same for you. And then like cancer might come along, or heart
Yep.
disease, or Alzheimer's, or
Yep.
muscle degenerative
Yeah.
diseases,
Anything.
and there's a lot, and I spend a proportionate amount of time worrying about stuff. So that's why I am the healthiest probably I've ever been in my life, and the fittest I've ever been in my life, because like my mum died when she was 58 of a heart
Yeah.
attack.
Yeah.
Like
Exactly. It focuses the mind.
I am not letting that happen. I am
No.
absolutely not. And because my
Yeah.
sister, um, she had a heart attack when she was like 64. So, and my
Yep.
brothers had a heart attack, and my dad died of a heart attack. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
everyone, we don't have
You got to do
cancer,
your bit.
but we have heart attack.
Uh,
Yay.
yeah. And the medical thing's definitely a factor. I don't know about you, Lynn, but as I sort of approach my 50s, and I kind of get to live vicariously through the lives of my clients. So, I mean, I've helped
Yeah.
countless clients walk through their 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s over the decades that I've been doing my job. And kind of the overriding theme is I spend most of my life trying to make my clients spend more money and live more for today, which might seem counterintuitive. Bear in mind that I'm a financial planner, so I'm trying to help people plan financially for the long term. But I'm absolutely unequivocal on the podcast, the YouTube channel, that if it comes to a choice as to whether I spend money now or one day or in the future, the answer is always to spend it now. Because life is short, tomorrow is
Yeah.
not promised to us. And I think as I get older, into 50s and 60s, that it's more sort of, well, actually, I'm not immortal. The
Yeah.
medical stuff kind of reinforces that it's kind of downhill for me. I don't want to be too negative, but physically it certainly is. That's just entropy. But if we can, we get one life, depending on your worldview, but certainly that's mine. We get one life, and so we should live it well. That's not to say we throw all sort of caution to the wind and just say, well, tomorrow will look after itself. I might be dead tomorrow. I think that's a very immature
Yeah.
worldview. We need to balance today and one day. But if we have to tip it one way or the others, I would always say, look, you might not be here tomorrow. And so
Yeah.
that means I pay heavily into my pensions. I'm overpaying my mortgage and it's nearly gone. But also, I'm like, actually, I'm going to stay in a nice hotel when I go on holiday.
Oh my God,
I'm
yeah.
fortunate. I've got that option, right? And
Yeah.
I'm going to pay for private medical because it makes me feel better. I'm fortunate I can do that. But I just think, man, I will spend money on today and
Yeah.
I will live for today and encourage my
Yeah.
kids to do that as well, while also making sure tomorrow is sorted if I can.
Yeah, and that's coming from a financial planner, so
It's
that's
just obvious to
really.
me, though, that,
Yeah, yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
too many
yeah.
financial advisors that are obsessed on getting people to invest for the future are only doing so because they get paid for money under management. So it's like, oh no,
Exactly.
you don't want to spend that because the advisor's earning
Oh,
1% on that money. I just think, well, I mean, I've long since come to understand that if you do the right thing, the universe will generally look after you. So,
Of course it
it's
will.
just like that it would be very short term for me to say to clients, oh, no, don't give that to your kids because, I will lose the fees
Yeah.
on it. Ridiculous. So live for
Yeah.
today. Do you know what I mean? And I think that
Yeah.
becomes more focused in your mind as you get into your 40s and 50s.
Yeah. And then because we're running out of time, I have you got another
I'm all
minute?
right for half an hour.
Okay, cool. I think we'll go on for like another 5 minutes. Let's keep it
Yeah.
to that.
Nice.
Because I do want to touch on what happens when you get into your 60s and 70s and 80s, because I have got some very wise people that surround me who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s.
Yeah.
Mostly women, I have to admit, because there's this I call it like crone energy, which is women who are beyond menopause. Okay, so their
Yeah.
period stopped a long time ago, and they have freedom because their kids have flown the nest. They are generally quite well off because because of the way our society runs at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
People older are very well off because they have
Yeah.
defined benefit pensions. They own
Yeah.
their houses.
Yeah.
Another way how life does get easier for older people. And I know I'd get potentially people ranting back at me. Oh, what about all the pensioners living in poverty? But there's a lot more children living in poverty proportionately than pensioners living in poverty. Um, sorry, I had to get that rant in.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I've got these elders who are just so wise. And I love, like, my stepmom is 85, and I love talking to her because she's my only connection to my parents, right?
Yeah.
She's got
Sure.
stories about my parents because they were all mates in the army, like in their 20s. And she ended up marrying my dad, which was all a bit weird after my mum died, but it's fine. And yeah, she just tells me these incredible stories of like when mum got drunk and fell out of a taxi door when she's trying to hold a bouquet of daffodils. And I'm like, oh, this is the most amazing story in the world. And when she imparts knowledge onto me, so I was talking to her about my love life a couple of weeks ago, and she's like, Lynn, stop chasing. That was all her words. She's like, it's gonna come to you. Just stop chasing. And I think when people can just say things like that in a couple of words, it stops you in your tracks and you're like, shit, yeah, I need to stop chasing.
Yeah. I think that again, that's just experience and sort of worldview and this the sort of the older you get, the more you realize that basically it's the same shit, different day sort of thing, and so you kind of learn to sort of distill stuff, don't you, into kind of pithy things like that. And what's fascinating is that as my parents get older, so my dad, I mean, we're fairly convinced my dad is somewhere on the spectrum, although he's never been diagnosed, but he's sort of ridiculously disciplined, really generally quite bad with people. He's taught himself to be better, but he said, we're watching Great British Sewing Bee, right? There's a lady called Susie on that who's just been kicked out, I think, before the final tonight or tomorrow. And she a really quirky style. Lady Gaga is her fashion icon, right? And this girl
Wow.
can sew, and she's made tons of her own outfits, and she properly stands out. And my dad is watching Sewing Bee. They were around for coffee, and Mum watches it, and he kind of like puts up with it. And he says, "Oh, Susie, clearly she's got deep psychological issues because of the clothes she wears." And I was like, Dad, you can't say that. Also, you don't have a psychological qualification to your name, so you're really not qualified to talk about that. But so I absolutely agree. We can get a lot of wisdom from the elders, but we also need
Yeah.
to, I think, however, wherever we take stuff from, right, whether it comes from inside our own heads, whether it comes from our kids, or whether it comes from our elders, we need to kind of weigh it. I mean, that was a very clear example of my dad talking absolute crap, right? And he just needs to shut up about stuff like that because he doesn't understand it. He's being far too judgmental. Another conversation with a distant relative who weighed in on the trans debate,
Oh
despite the
God.
fact that they've never probably been within like 3 miles of a trans person and has no concept of what
No.
it's like to struggle in a body that you don't believe is yours and has no compassion. And I nearly killed him with my bare hands, but for the purposes of family unity, I kind of just said, I really don't know that you're qualified to weigh in on that. So I have a coach who is a trans guy, and it's given me unbelievable insight onto, I can't possibly understand what it's like to be him and what all the crap that he's had to deal with and continues to do so in a world which basically doesn't want him to exist. And, you know, so when I find myself getting properly rabid because I love that guy. And when I see people who should know better make comments about the world, it's from their worldview and it's from their experience. And I have to kind of try and remember that. But I also have to just weigh it and say, well, actually, based on my perception of the world, what you just said is wrong, judgmental, uncompassionate, and I'm just going to ignore it. Whereas your stepmom saying, stop chasing, then it's going to come to you, that's wisdom. And so I think we need to learn to perceive wisdom when it's there, but also we need to judge and weigh and sift what we hear, what we take in from the world, from whatever source, and try and be wise ourselves. Accept our own failings, man, and our own limitations. That's classic Marcus Aurelius. If we accept our own limitations and maybe, just maybe, consider that I might be wrong about some stuff, that's a really great place to come from, because you can't judge others if you know that basically you're just winging it yourself. You know, we said that right at the start. None of us really know what we're doing. We're just trying to find our way through an increasingly complex world. And I think as we get older, for me, life getting easier as we get older is about learning to perceive the world in light of my own smallness, and understand that the world is huge, it's complicated, it's massive, it's fucking awesome. But it's really hard for a lot of people. And all I know is my own perspective, which is one tiny fraction of the human condition. I think if we can keep stuff in its place, that is a very healthy way to age. That's my soapbox. We need to learn to think and feel and have compassion. And if we start from the point of view of actually caring about other people instead of maintaining our own worldview, I think that'll stand us in good stead. That's why I wanted to answer this question.
Amen.
Amen. Preach.
Oh gosh, that was amazing.
That was too long to get into a reel.
Reels are 3 minutes now.
Are they? See, that shows what I know.
Yeah. And my AI tool will snip that out. And I will turn that into a reel. Do not worry. Oh, that's so cool. Right. I'm gonna. Oh, I went into Cornish there. Yes, it's because I'm talking to someone from Penzance. Let's close it there because that was brilliant. So just tell people where to find you and.
Cool. Yeah, look, everything's at meaningfulmoney.tv is the kind of homepage really, but just search either me, Pete Matthew, or search Meaningful Money. And you'll find what I'm up to, really. All sorts of stuff going on. Far too much to mention. But, I have an academy. I have a coaching service that we're working on that isn't quite live yet, but which is really exciting. Jackson's. Everything. You can find it all from meaningfulmoney.tv.
Amazing. Cool. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, mate.
Right. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. That's like... I always love my chats with you. And do you know what? I often listen back to them, particularly from like years ago. Because
really?
You are really wise. You are.
Oh, bless you. I think about stuff, which I guess is just the way I was raised. So
you're well read, and you are the least judgmental person I know.
Oh God, I hope so. I hate judgmental people. It's one of my pet hates. So good, thank you. I'll take that that praise for what it is. Thank you.
Yeah, cool. And of course, thanks for looking after my sister, as I say to you so many times.
Absolute pleasure.
So yeah, thank you ever so much. And people listening, please subscribe to the podcast, because the numbers are building very nicely, because I know I had a 1-year hiatus with a break. So yeah, it's back. And if you're watching, not many people watch my podcast, which is really annoying, because it's so much more engaging watching us and the body language and everything. But yeah, go watch it on YouTube. Right, cool. Thank you very much.